I'm Dr. John Plake, Chief Innovation Officer at American Bible Society and Editor-in-Chief of the State of the Bible Research Study. Since 2011, we've been exploring America's relationship with the Bible, faith, and the church. And today, I'm really honored to welcome Dr. Christine Arnzen to the podcast. Dr. Arnzen is a licensed professional counselor. She's a professor of counseling at Concordia University's Townsend Institute, and she holds a PhD in counselor education and supervision. She has an amazing career in counseling and counselor education. It spans 35 years across a lot of really interesting roles. I hope she'll tell us more about some of those in just a few minutes. But she's been director of counselor education at Evangel University, where she and I served together, and director of clinical services at Focus Marriage Institute. So Christine has tons of unique insights about the critical role of self-care in helping us be healthy people, healthy Christians, followers of Jesus. And she knows firsthand that prioritizing personal well-being isn't just a luxury. It's a non-negotiable for sustained personal and professional success. At home, Chris embraces a life filled with some simple joys, including her husband, Jim, who's not simple, but he is a wonderful person. They have 3 daughters and their sons-in-law. They, of course, have some wonderful grandchildren. All grandchildren are wonderful, I hear. Looking forward to that day. But for now, we're going to wait until the appropriate time. For her, though, self-care often means gathering for a shared meal, what must be really competitive family game nights, and finding spiritual renewal in worship and grounding amid a really busy life. Christine and I did serve together on the faculty of Evangel University for a time, and I really deeply respect both her abilities as a counselor educator, which was her role then, and her insights into the challenges that are faced by the next generation of emerging adults. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. It is wonderful to see you again.
It's wonderful to be here with you.
Well, hey, you and I have worked together, and so we know each other. We sat at the lunch table in the cafeteria, and we're fellow members of the steering committee of everything. But I think for our listeners, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your journey in counseling and counselor education, and maybe some of the big lessons that you've learned about mental and emotional health along the way?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for that introduction. And a little bit about me. I really had a heart for mental health counseling because I was raised in a minister's home, and I had really a front row seat to conversations about mental health, even though it wasn't necessarily labeled as such. But it was very common for couples, families, individuals to be in and out of my family home and hearing conversations about how people were struggling. My dad was a pastor for 40 years of a pretty small church when I was a child. And so at the time, there wasn't a lot of resources for him to refer people to. And I would hear, although I didn't know all the details about people's lives because it wouldn't be appropriate, but I did hear my mom and dad talk about the need for resources. He would say, why don't I have anybody to tell them to go to? Because he felt limited. And I think at a very young age, I would say late elementary, early junior high, I began to just be interested in ideas around mental health. How does that happen for a 12-year-old? I don't know. Other than I think it really was what we understand as a calling. And so later, I went on to undergraduate school, and I wasn't really sure how I was even going to pay for it, but God had a different plan, and he provided the resources all the way through, whether it was undergrad, graduate, and even my doctoral studies. And all through that, I believe that God's hand was on the opportunities for me to be not only a counselor, but a counselor educator.
That's an amazing history. I just want to jump in here because I know you're going to tell us a little bit more, but you and I don't think we've ever had this conversation. You and I share this background of growing up in ministers' homes. I grew up in an Assemblies of God district office. My parents worked there, and so they were part of helping a network of churches to grow and thrive, but also over 900 ministers who were part of that network. And of course, ministers are people, and we struggle with lots of issues as well. And unfortunately, I think, you were hearing about the struggles that people were having in your local church. I was sitting at the dinner table, sometimes hearing, with compassion, I think with a lot of grace, about the struggles that ministers were having in their homes. And it awakened in me really a desire to help them do well. And I like to think some of the work that we're doing through State of the Bible is helping to shine a light on the incredible role that pastors and church leaders play and how important their mental and emotional health is as well. And we're going to return to that in just a minute. But let me toss it back to you. Tell us a little bit about what happens in your journey along the way and your counseling practice.
Yes, and so when I set out to study psychology and counseling, it was during a time where really the church didn't value mental health conversations. This was in the 80s, so it's been a while since then. But over time, what I've noticed is that there has been a softening and an opening to understanding the interplay between spirituality and mental health. And one of the things that I have found is that as people struggle spiritually, they also will struggle with their mental health and vice versa. If they're struggling with their mental health, it's harder to engage spiritually. And so when we talk about self-care, the facets of self-care are very interconnected. Even though they seem to be separate, they are interconnected and interrelated. So for me, the leap to understanding mental health issues and how that could help the church and fellow believers was really a privilege and an opportunity to make a difference, like you said, in church communities, within our local community, within like community mental health centers that are not necessarily faith-based, and then also within church, within our pastoral families. Because that was one of the things I ended up having a real heart for, is watching some of the struggles that I knew that pastors' families went through. Sometimes it was firsthand and through the context that I had as well.
That's really interesting. And later on, I think you had an opportunity to do some work at what at the time was called, I believe, the National Institute of Marriage. They may have a different name now. But I remember when you were working on your doctoral dissertation and doing some of that research, we were colleagues at that time, and you had an opportunity really to work with married couples who were experiencing incredible distress in their marriage relationship. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. And so, one of the things that I found was that couples may look really great on the outside, but they can be struggling and highly distressed on the inside. So they may have a lot of financial success, professional success, own lots of things, have several children that are involved in lots of activities, take yearly vacations, but underneath it, there's a price to pay for running at life so fast and furious that sometimes they lose perspective. And in doing so, they disconnect from each other. And what ends up happening is that the relationship takes a hit and they experience lots of distress.
Well, there are lots of reasons that people face stresses today, and we've been profiling some of those in this year's State of the Bible report. Of course, every year we focus on our human flourishing data. And one of the things that we noticed is that self-care behaviors or ways that we take care of ourselves can really have an impact on our overall well-being and on human flourishing. So some of our listeners may remember that in our last chapter, we introduced human flourishing, and we were looking at how scripture engagement and active faith participation actually contribute to higher levels of flourishing or well-being, whichever term you would prefer. And I'm curious, Chris, What have you learned about self-care and its role in mental and spiritual health, especially in light of your experience? I know you've worked with college and university students, you've worked with adults at other stages of life, but what's the relationship between self-care and overall mental and spiritual health?
Well, I'd like to go back to the couples that were in distress that I worked with. When couples are in distress, while every couple is unique, one thing that we started to notice was a pattern. And so that was myself and the colleagues that I worked with at it was Hope. It's now called Hope Restored. And what we found was that self-care within Christian circles sometimes is not very palatable of a term because it's equated with selfishness. But what we noted is that many times what happened with couples is that it was really the lack of self-care that contributed a tremendous amount to the marital distress. And that is based on sometimes an unspoken and maybe not even recognized expectation that when couples get married, that they believe that the other person is to take care of them, that it is the other spouse's job to make sure that they're well cared for. And while that's reasonable to believe that our spouse can be caring towards us, the ultimate responsibility to care well for ourselves and all the facets of our lives is really ultimately our own responsibility, because that's who we're going to stand before the Lord and give an account for. Not only that, to take on the responsibility of caring for another person, specifically an adult person that's fully capable and functioning, is way too much for someone's shoulders. And all you have to talk to is a brand new parent of a newborn. And just to have that level of responsibility of caring for another person, we can see how it is taxing, and it's only supposed to occur for a period of time and not indefinitely. So with that, one of the first things that we would teach couples and really make an intervention is for them to assess how well are they caring for themselves. So it didn't seem logical for many couples, because why they were there receiving our services was really to get their spouse to care more for them. And it just didn't seem reasonable. But what we found is that first and foremost, if we take care of ourselves, if we are making sure that we are committed to our own self-care, we end up teaching people, whether it's our spouse, our coworkers, our family, that we are affirming our value in our God design, and that is that we are valuable human beings and we are to steward this gift of life within us. When that's not done, we struggle.
That reminds me so much of Jesus saying that one of our obligations is to love our neighbor as ourselves. But if we're not loving and taking care of ourselves, we don't have anything left to give to our neighbors. And so we can't engage in those pro-social behaviors, those neighbor-loving behaviors, if we don't first take care of the self-care behaviors. I think people who follow along with us on this journey realize that we think the Bible is a big part of how we take care of ourselves. In fact, we've profiled the connection between scripture engagement and human flourishing. We've talked about that before. But we can also notice in our research that there's a small but really consistent benefit from certain practices, self-care practices, like prayer, like exercise, like making social connections with others. All of those things seem to make a pretty significant difference in people's overall human flourishing or well-being. I wonder, why do you think these very simple habits have such a powerful effect on our well-being? And maybe are there other simple things that people can be doing to take care of themselves they might not have thought of?
So it's interesting that when I hear conversations around self-care, and even work with clients that talk about needing to increase their self-care, oftentimes they're referring to activities that are solitary in nature. So I'm going to go out on a walk by myself. I'm going to go get a massage. I'm going to get my nails done. Those types of things. They're very solitary. I'm going to read a book. Those are solitary types of activities. And while that is really good, and for some people, they actually need alone time to recharge so they can come back to social types of engagements. If we look at self-care as just that, just something that we do on a solitary basis, we're missing the essence of what it is to be a human being. And the essence of our humanity is that we were born to mirror God, and we were created to mirror God's image, and that is to be in relationship. Take it a little bit further. It's to attach to each other and to have relational exchanges. And so when we're praying together, when we're meeting together in terms of faith communities, when we're serving together, what we're doing is one more time affirming this very beautiful human design that God He set forth at the beginning of time, and that is that we get to experience relationship. So self-care becomes really important when we ask ourselves, to what end? What end? And that is for us to not only have relationships so people can pour into us, but that we can also pour into other people, that it's very mutual. And in doing so, we live a much more balanced life.
That's so interesting, because we were talking about prayer, exercise. Some of those things can be done either alone or they can be done with others. So I can pray by myself, which I do, but I can also pray with others and in that way value them and build a relationship. I can exercise, go for a walk by myself, or I can go for a walk with my wife or with friends and build that social connection. That kind of leads us into the next topic that I wanted to talk about, because it's been kind of interesting. I don't normally think of volunteering to serve others as a means of self-care. Like that doesn't, I don't usually put those things together, but we began to notice that while those solitary activities have some small impact on overall flourishing, volunteering to serve others has a very large impact on human flourishing. In fact, those who volunteer, we see that they go from 30% of non-volunteers being in a high flourishing category to 49% of those who serve as volunteers being in that high flourishing category. So I guess, can you unpack a little more? What is it about giving back to others that helps us feel more whole?
Again, I think it does affirm the value of another human being. And that, again, that just supports that connection that we will experience, whether it's one time or over a lifetime. I think it might be helpful to revisit or visit a theorist by the name of Alfred Adler. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was a contemporary of Freud. And where Freud emphasized psychosexual, stages and really energy and and the influences of such that, Adler was very different. Adler believed that well-being was, in essence, related to three life tasks. The first one is, what am I going to do for meaningful work? The second one is, who am I going to love? Who am I going to be committed to? Who's going to be in my social sphere? And the third one is, how am I going to impact society? What he called social interest. He really believed that people that were struggling with their mental health, one of the best treatments was to get them engaged in some type of social interest, something that they were contributing back to the community. And while that seems unique to Adler for his time, we know that that's not unique in terms of what Jesus said. And you referenced it already, that we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. So as we are serving our community, and who is our neighbor? I mean, there's scripture about who is our neighbor. And I think about how I'm now teaching at a Lutheran university, and there was a paraphrase of something that Luther said in one of the orientation classes that I'm taking to be part of this university. And it's basically this, that God does not need our good works, but our neighbors do. And so as we are engaging in good works, we are actually loving God. So first and foremost, we love God through these good works, but we also get to love our neighbor. And isn't that beautiful how God sets in place, in motion, this incredibly efficient and dynamic process that we get to experience him through it, as well as loving our neighbor. So that's, volunteering is amazing. And it's not necessarily just for people of faith. It's for people across the spectrum of our society, that it is in their best interest to give back and serve in community.
It's interesting you brought up in your comments about Adler that what he had to say closely paralleled a modern human flourishing design when we look at the domain of close social relationships being a part of what it means to live a good life, but also having meaning and purpose in our lives. We don't want to be aimless in our lives. We feel unmoored and like we're not really doing whatever we were created to do. I want to switch subjects if I could, or not entirely, but I want to turn our lens a little bit toward America's youngest adult generation. So Gen Z, you have kids, you have grandkids. I'm not sure if your kids are millennials or Gen Z, but Gen Z goes up to age 28 this year. And so one of the interesting things about them is they're at a different stage of life than most pastors and church leaders, and they seem to be facing some unique self-care challenges that we see that are generational for, let's say, Gen Z and millennials. They've grown up in a different age than I did, different access to technology, different kinds of pressures and stresses. And consequently, they're not doing very well as a whole on human flourishing scores. So I wonder if there are practices or if there's counsel that we can give to those who are working with young adults that can help them to thrive more and to take better care of themselves.
Yeah. So what's interesting, as I ponder and think about this group, there are a couple of things. And I'll just say that I'm watching this as a mom too, or really as a grandmother of my Gen Z adult children caring for their own children. So their access to information about wellness, I mean, the way that they care for their kids is just really over, like, I would have never thought of half the things that they think of and tell me about and what I should and should not do. Because they have so much more access to information. And if you look even at what's available and their ability to access this information through apps, through social media, through just technology in general, we know that a lot of money and a lot of marketing is going to wellness apps, wellness products, and so on and so forth. And so while they are overloaded with wellness messaging, that may not necessarily translate to the practice of wellness or the long-term effects of wellness. And I think part of that has to do with how rapid and quick their lives changed, even through COVID. Immediately, things change on a dime. And I think that our Gen Zers don't necessarily have maybe the confidence that things are going to be secure and long-lasting. as I think through this too, is that when I talked about Adler and his 3 life tasks, digital platforms and our access to digital information is so instantaneous. And yet those 3 life tasks, who am I going to love? What am I going to do for a meaningful career? And how am I going to give back to society? Those are long-term. Those are questions that span decades. And to have that sense of urgency that I have to have it figured out now. And if I don't look like I have that part of my life figured out, then, oh my goodness, something is wrong. No, something is very right. And that is that you're a human being and you're trying to mature and figure out life and do that with integrity, I hope. Some of us have, support systems like the church community to support us through that. But some of us don't necessarily have that. And that's where I think our churches can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I agree. I think, having intergenerational relationships can be so helpful. And it's really easy for us to get locked into our echo chambers, whether those are, political echo chambers or, religious echo chambers or whatever kind of thing, age-related kinds of things where, if you ever tried to have an online exchange with somebody in Gen Alpha and tried to understand, what happened to the chat, fam, I don't quite get what's going on there. They do have a way of connecting and their own means for that. But I think the powerful thing for me about the church was always that there were older people who were further along, who would pray for me, who would teach me to pray and help me to build the skills that were necessary to have not only solid mental health, but also a solid spiritual relationship with God that would last a lifetime, not just for the next 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting that you say that. My husband and I had noticed that there was a gap, a deficit, and we, in some of our own self-care, spiritually as well as socially. And so one of the things that we did is offered a life group. And so, to be expected, we're in our early 60s. And so many of the folks that were drawn when we announced that we were going to do this life group, many of the folks that expressed interest in us actually were in their early 60s and older. What I found fascinating is that we had 2 individuals from our community, from our church, that were about more than 35 years younger than us, want to join. And I thought, join our life group. And I'm thinking, why? And one of the reasons is that we need the wisdom of people that are older than us. And we're making career choices and we really want somebody to walk alongside of us, which has been so fascinating because even though our life group was basically offered for a period of months, these folks have continued to tap into, these younger folks have continued to tap into my relationship with them as well as my husband, and just wanting to connect and hear about life and us hear about their lives as well. So it's just so fascinating what you were saying, that sometimes we underestimate the power and really the desire to connect with somebody that's already maybe 2, 3, 4 decades down the road from where they are. And my hope is that it builds hope for the younger generation, especially if we normalize that this is so developmental and it doesn't have to be figured out right now.
I agree. You're going to get me on my hobby horse, but I want to reflect back to when we were serving together at Evangel University. We were doing some research. You might figure I'd be doing research, right? And we were doing some research with the students on campus there and at several other campuses as well. And one of the things that we were hearing from the students is they really were looking for a mentor. And if you're involved in Christian higher education, you know that scaling a mentorship model it's like climbing Mount Everest. It's really difficult to find enough staff and enough resources in a Christian college or university to get that work done. And so we sat down and brought together a focus group of young people who were wanting mentors. And I thought, here's what I'll do. I'm going to make a suggestion and see what they say about it. I said, would you like to have, when you say a mentor, what do you mean? Would you like to have someone be your mentor? Maybe you're a freshman and they're a senior. And they just looked at me like I had two heads. And they said, no, I don't know. They're just students, just like me. I mean, there's not that much difference between a freshman and a senior in traditional undergraduate education. And I said, well, what are you looking for? And they said, well, we want someone with more experience. We want somebody who's kind of a surrogate parent in a way, but not my parents. I want a faculty member or a staff member who loves and cares about students. And I said, well, what would that look like? And they said, oh, well, we would go to their house on Sunday and we'd eat pizza. And I said, would you do a Bible study? No, we do Bible studies all the time. We would sit and watch football and eat pizza and chips. And I said, well, how does that actually form a mentorship relationship? And they said, well, what you're missing is it builds the relationship. And then when we need to ask a question that we don't know where to go, we'll go to the person who feeds us, basically. We've built the relationship. And so through that, we have a place where we can go for care and for counsel and for advice that we would get from a mentor. I thought that was fascinating. They knew more about how to find a mentor than I knew about how to build a program around mentorship.
I love that you are referencing this because on some level, I think about, yes, this pertains to Gen Z, but across the board, I think if you are an executive or you're in a leadership position, or if you're a mom in her 40s and trying to make sense of these emerging teenagers, there's something about having safe people to run by questions and maybe even fears and insecurities that I think is just helps build resilience. Sadly, most people think that the only time that you get to talk about those things, or the first place you need to go to, is to a mental health counselor, or maybe even a pastor. I'm not downplaying mental health counseling, and I'm not downplaying pastoral ministry, but there is something powerful about community and relationships. I noted in my bio that I work for Concordia University, but I'm also housed, my position is housed within the Townsend Institute of Counseling and Executive Coaching and Leadership. This institute was founded by John Townsend, and he's really well known. He's co-authored and authored many books within, and a lot of Christian circles will utilize his books as well as secular sources as well. But one of the books that he wrote was Boundaries, but even another book that he wrote that I find is really helpful to this conversation is People Fuel. And he talks about how we desperately need a team of people around us to pour into our lives. And this is one of the things that I referenced when I was talking about couples that were in distress. When we look at our spouse as the source, now they become not only the reason for the problem, but they also become the solution for the problem. And in that moment, I feel completely helpless. So in order to take really good care of ourselves and to thrive in the various spheres, we need a team of people that can pour into our lives, and then we can be a team member that pours into another person's life. This is very dynamic. And so there are times where we need support. Sometimes we need comfort. Sometimes we need to be challenged. We need information that these team members can provide. Just empathy, instruction, all of those different things. Not one person can really fully take care of that. In fact, it is something that the community offers. And the church community is one of those communities where that's a little bit more accessible. When we are part of a church community, it is accessible, but with the mindset that it has to be consistent, that our attendance within that church community needs to be relatively consistent, that it takes grace and time to develop. So, while the church community is fantastic and a ready-made resource for that, we do have to be realistic about what we expect and also the role that we play.
Yeah, that's so good. I've been thinking a lot lately about 4 things, probably not the only 4 things, but certainly 4 things that I think people need in order to thrive. One of them is I really do think they need God's word in a format and a language that they can understand. I know a lot of people struggle with the language of the Bible or the cultural distance of the Bible, but we need a way in a valid, reliable way to be able to access what God said and what he is saying to us. And I think the Bible is a big part of that. The second thing is we need a vibrant Christian community that we can be a part of. And I know there are all kinds of churches, and some of them are probably vibrant and some of them are not. I've probably pastored some that weren't all that vibrant. So, not throwing rocks at anyone, but we need to find community, the community of fellow followers of Jesus that is life-giving. Third, everybody needs a mentor or a guide, just somebody who's a little further along. I know for me, my dad played that role for a big part of my life. And I'm really grateful to him for modeling Christian leadership and caring for others and so many other characteristics. As we're recording this, it's not far after Father's Day, and I've been thinking about these things. And then the last thing we all need is a way to give back. We weren't designed to just be a holding container of blessing. We were designed to receive blessing and pass it on to others. And I think in those ways, we are much healthier than if we lack any one of those things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm thinking about your Gen Z question. And in recent conversations, I've been aware of, while maybe some of the digital accessing and some of the ways that communication occurs among this population or this group, they are also incredibly attuned to diversity issues, the need for service, environmental issues. And there are ways, I think, as people that maybe are 1, 2, 3 decades down the line, I think it would be amazing for us to affirm that on a regular basis and find ways to connect with them in their efforts to make and contribute to society that helps it thrive and flourish. I just recently heard about one Gen Zer that has decided to use an app and sign up to help individuals that have visual impairments. I don't know if you've heard about this, but they may not be able to see color, or they may not be able to see certain items within their home. And so they get on this app and ask for help, and they have it set up where this person on the other end can help pick out an outfit. If they're colorblind, or is this appropriate for an interview, those types of things. Something very short term, maybe it takes all of 5 to 10 minutes, but it's giving back to the society or the community. It's an act of service that deepens a sense of meaning and purpose, and hopefully in the process, they get to experience God's transcendence by loving him and loving their neighbor.
It sounds like we take care of ourselves by taking care of others, at least in part. And that's really wonderful. I know our time is almost gone, Chris, but I wanted to kind of leave the last word with you. Let's just say that there's somebody who's listening to this right now who feels pretty spiritually dry. Maybe they're emotionally exhausted or unsure where to begin when it comes to self-care. Can you offer some counsel or some practical advice for someone who's in that state?
I think one of the most practical things comes out of my own experience. I can run pretty hard and pretty fast at life. The pace is crazy at times, and I can become very depleted, and that what you described as just feeling dry and maybe like a desert when it comes to my well-being and just needing more nourishment. And I'm not talking, sometimes I do talk about nourishment as in like physical food, because when I'm in that state, I'm not eating well. I'm eating on the fly and junk food. And that gets you through the moment, but it doesn't help me to be more healthy and have more energy across the board or for the long term. But one of the things that I found, whether it's my spiritual life, my physical life, my social and emotional, my mental life, even career, is to be realistic about the goals that I set. When I'm feeling really depleted, it's in a moment of crisis, maybe, that I will say, I got to do something about this. And then I come up with this plan that I need to do to get me to a better level of functioning and a better sense of wellness. But what I realize is oftentimes it's not realistic. It needs to be much more specific and much more realistic for me to feel successful. Because when people feel successful, even if it's just one little success, the success can build upon the next success, upon the next success. And it provides a different perspective. And hopefully it is more about that I can do this and I feel better. So whatever it is, that it needs to be within the realm of realistic and accessible to you as a person. Don't try to live somebody else's life, but just be really mindful of what you're capable of and set goals accordingly. So whether it's in our physical well-being, our spiritual well-being, our social life, our mental, how do we manage our stress? That is going to be so key to what we do and how we thrive.
Well, Chris, I'm going to let that be the last word. I want to thank you so much for being with me today. My guest has been Dr. Christine Arnzen. You can learn more about her work at the Townsend Institute for Leadership and Counseling by visiting cui.edu/Townsend. It's TOWNSEND. And you can learn more about the state of the Bible in America by visiting stateofthebible.org and connect with American Bible Society at americanbible.org. We'll have you surfing the internet for a long time now. For the entire State of the Bible team, I'm John Plake. Thank you, and God bless you.